A little over a month ago, a friend of mine decided to leave her abusive husband after nearly 20 years. Now, I haven't known this friend for even a year yet. We met at work, but it pretty much instantly clicked. Plus, when you meet someone who's been through the same kind of things you have, you don't have to go into the details because they kinda already know. The weekend before she left, they came to my son's birthday party. This was the first time I'd ever met the man, aside from seeing him when he'd come into the store every now and then. Some things to know about me. I've lived in the middle of nowhere. It's like 30 minutes into a town that only has 2 red lights and a Walmart in the middle of nowhere. I've been through hell with my ex-husband, to the point I have a no-contact order where he's never allowed to have any kind of information for or about me. Also, my Facebook is set to where unless I specifically give you the link or you knew me 20 plus years ago, you will never find me. So that Friday, I go into town and get some cigs and some other things. My friend tells me she's leaving that day. She's not taking her teenage children because both of them acted just like their dad, plus they would have told him exactly where she was at. She was also planning on turning her phone off. That literally was the only information I had. I told her to be super careful and let me know that she was safe when she could, and then I went home. About 9:30 that night, I'm at home alone, when all of a sudden out of nowhere my doorbell rings. I check to see who it is. It's her husband. Is my wife here? No. Do you know where she's at? No, but if I hear anything from her, I'll be sure to let her know you're looking for her. I don't know why you're hiding her or won't tell me the truth. Her boys are distraught that she's gone and killed herself. I push my door open slightly. Do you want to come in and search? Because I guarantee you she's not here, and I don't know where she's at. I promise if I hear from her, I'll tell her that you're looking for her. He called me a stupid cunt and walked down the steps. He proceeded to sit out front of my house for almost 10 minutes. He then pulled around the back side of the area by the lake and sat there for who knows how long. I left to go get a friend to come stay with me for the night after that. A little bit after midnight, I got a Facebook message from her youngest son, asking me once again if I knew where she was at. I told him the exact same thing I told the husband. No, I didn't, but if I heard from her, I'd tell her they were looking for her. He said thank you, and that was it. Now, having her husband show up at my house and her kid finding my Facebook set my anxiety on edge. I didn't get much sleep that night, needless to say. So, I was awake at 6 a.m. when her oldest son messaged me on Facebook, demanding to know where his mom was, telling me I better not lie to him, or else. All I could do was tell him the exact same thing I'd been saying the whole time. He proceeded to tell me his dad filed a missing persons report, and the cops were coming after me because I was hiding her. A little after 7, I got a call from a number I didn't know. I normally don't answer numbers like that, but I was hoping it was my friend, so I answered. Hello? Angel, this is Sophie's sister Michelle. Do you know where my sister is at? No, but if I hear from her, I promise I'll tell her everyone's looking for her. When's the last time you saw her? How was she acting? Was she on anything? I saw her at work and she was acting fine, and no, she wasn't on anything. She proceeded to go on about the cops, then the call ended. A little while later, Sophie messaged me. I called her and filled her in on everything, and helped her make a 3-way call to law enforcement to talk to them. I was heading back into town to get gas because I was leaving for a few days, when my phone rang again. It's mine and Sophie's former store manager from where we worked. So I guess you're wondering why everyone's trying to get a hold of you so bad. No, I know. Well, I gave all her family your number because I know you know something. Sorry. I hung up because then I started shutting down. I went into a full-blown panic attack when I found out shortly after that this person had posted my number to her Facebook, telling all of Sophie's friends to reach out to me for information. This is already long, so I'll try to sum the rest up. What has proceeded over the last 4 weeks is being accused of hiding her, breaking up her family. I was originally a crackhead, then I got upgraded to a meth head. I've been harassed, threatened, sexually threatened. Her husband has stalked my house, broken in, and all of this after they were told by law enforcement she did this by her own choice, and I had nothing to do with it. I have reports with 3 different departments. Her husband was given a criminal trespass, then broke in. The deputy handling things for my house pushed me to go for a restraining order, which the judge denied because he hasn't done anything to me. I'm currently some hours from home, but I'm so tired and mad and terrified. I went through this crap with my own ex. I don't think I can mentally handle going through it again. I've lost the one safe place I had. My dad's house is no longer safe for me because this man has targeted me. Not even my friend saw this coming from her husband. Just recently, I had to make a quick run to Walmart after work for a few smaller items I'd forgotten the day before. About halfway into my trip, I was approached by a woman and a young girl who asked me to buy a pack of diapers for them. Now, I do enjoy helping people whenever I can, but something felt incredibly off-putting about this situation. Something about the way she just strode right up to me and asked. It all felt very rehearsed. I told her no in the most polite way I could muster. She nodded and went on her own way. I was prepared to deal with potentially having turned a woman away who genuinely needed help, but like I mentioned, something just felt really wrong about this. I completed the rest of my shopping and was well on my way to forgetting about this encounter, but when I made my way up to the self-checkout, suddenly the same lady and little girl made a straight beeline for me. She didn't look at me or speak. She and the girl just started scanning not only the diapers, but items they had hidden underneath their clothes, racking up a huge total on the self-checkout. Completely stupefied that she just brazenly assumed I'd pay for all of this, I got the attention of the associate and quietly explained the situation, making it abundantly clear I was not trying to make a scene, but I simply didn't know these people, and I wasn't about to pay for their belongings now that I knew this was all a ploy. He quickly told me they'd had to deal with her before, and I wasn't the first customer she'd had a run-in with either. He put on his most patient customer service voice and talked to the woman. At first, she pretended not to speak English, despite clearly having a pretty firm grasp on it earlier when asking me to buy diapers for them. She just kept pointing to me as if to indicate she and the girl were with me. Thankfully, though, she wasn't fooling the associate, who by now had not only cleared her items from my checkout, but had placed himself between me and the woman, still pretending she couldn't understand him, and still adamant we were together. She was getting louder, though, and things had started escalating now. I made it a point to pay for my belongings and hightail it straight out of there. I hurried out to the car, closing the door just in time to see the little girl nearly sprinting to catch up with me, the woman not far behind her. My panic set in immediately, and I was suddenly trying to lock the doors, throw the groceries in, and buckle up all at once. She was frantically tapping at my window as I cranked the car with what I assumed at first was her nail. I wasn't going to look until I caught the sun gleaming off of something in the corner of my eye. I turned to find that she was not tapping with her nail, but instead the tip of a switchblade, making slow, deliberate slicing motions with it. Just about the only thing I could think to do was throw my car into reverse and get the hell out of there. As I did so, she and the girl slowly walked in front of my car, heading back toward the store. As she was walking by, the woman turned and looked at me and gave what I could only describe as the most sinister smile I'd ever seen. There was just something so deeply insidious about the way she gave me that knowing look, a truly diabolical version of the kind look a mischievous kid gives you when they know they're doing something they're not supposed to. I was shaken, but in the end ultimately okay, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't look over my shoulder for a long while after. This happened in Thailand in 2014. I had lost my job in Zurich and decided to use the opportunity to make a trip around the world, starting with Southeast Asia. I've always wanted to work with animals, So after backpacking Vietnam and parts of Thailand, I applied for a volunteer position at an ape sanctuary. They told me I could start whenever I wanted to. The deal was that I had to make a deposit of around 20,000 baht, which nowadays translates to just a bit more than 500 USD. They told me that if I stayed at least 3 months, I would get 70% of my money back. The early days of working there were just wonderful. The place was full of young, motivated people who thought they could save the world one ape at a time. The majority of these animals were rescued gibbons. Our goal was to nurse them back to health and eventually release them back into the wild. Our responsibilities as volunteers were to feed them, clean their cages, and educate visiting tourists on the horrors of the illegal pet trade in Thailand. Before they came to us, most of the gibbons had been abused as tourist attractions. You know, those pictures you see on Facebook from people being on vacation somewhere in Asia, where they hold cute animals into the camera? That's how the poachers make their money. They'll put a gibbon, lizard, or slow loris on your shoulder, snap a picture, and charge you for it afterwards. I can tell you that every single one of those animals has been through hell and was or will be killed sometime soon after that photo was taken. The thing is, poachers can only use the babies as tourist attractions. As soon as they reach maturity, they become territorial and aggressive, and then they're no longer of use to them. On average, to get just a single baby, a poacher has to kill 15 other gibbons. This is because they're still attached to their mother at that age. The poachers will shoot her first. Then they shoot the father because he'll be trying to protect the baby. In most cases, the baby won't survive from the fall from the trees, so the poachers have to kill a few more families until at least one baby lives. Then the real pain starts. They have their fangs ripped out without anesthetics so they can't bite. They'll be drugged so they stay awake during the night when tourists roam the streets. They'll be chained up so they can't escape, kept in tiny cages, fed the wrong food, and some will be taught to drink alcohol or even smoke. As soon as they're no longer of use, they'll be left to die. The poachers then go and find the next baby. As you can imagine, most of those gibbons in that sanctuary were pretty traumatized. Still though, working with them was fascinating. You could just tell they all had their own unique personalities, little quirks, preferences, and biases. Most of them were actually quite shy. Some only tolerated men near them. Some disliked girls with blonde hair, etc. One female took a particular liking to me. Every time I walked by her cage, she would start masturbating furiously. Her boyfriend, who was kept in the same cage, did not seem to care at all though. I spent my days cutting fruit, mixing cement, hosing poo down the drain, and getting bitten by tons of mosquitoes. Even though it was hard labor without any real pay, it was probably one of the best times of my whole trip. We all felt like we were doing something selfless, something noble. It was truly a fulfilling experience. Then one day I was scheduled to work in the quarantine area. This is the place the tourists never get to see. It's where they keep the really bad cases, the gibbons that had been damaged beyond all hope of recovery. They told me some things that had been done to them, unspeakable horrors. All of them were either too sick, too weak, or too aggressive to ever be released back into the wild again. To be blunt, most of them were batshit crazy. First, there was Nini. She was hyperactive and showed self-mutilating behavior. You always had to feed her first. If she saw you give food to a different cage before hers, she would flip her shit, rip out her water container, throw herself on the floor and start biting her own arm off. She was also just kinda mean. The other volunteers had warned me that she would try to startle me on purpose. She would hide in dark corners of her cage, acting as if she was busy or sleeping, but as soon as you turned your back to her, she would jump at the bars right behind you with this ear-piercing scream. I've dropped more than one food basket in this manner. After a few times of that happening, I got sick of her shit. I filled my mouth with water and walked closely by her cage facing away, just far enough she couldn't reach me if she stuck her arm through the wire. As soon as I heard her move, I instantly turned around and spit the water at her. It didn't hit her or anything, but she never tried to scare me again after that. Then there was one who literally looked and behaved like a zombie. His name was Fanta. He'd been blinded by an infection in both eyes. They were white and foggy. Big chunks of his fur had fallen out, giving him a very decrepit appearance. He never swung, only moved by, slowly walking along the branches in his cage. You had to rattle his food basket during feeding time just so he would know when to come and eat. There was another one called Pam. She was special. They never told me exactly what had happened to her, but she was missing one foot, one hand, and all but 2 fingers on her other. You had to cut up her food into really small pieces because she had a hard time eating herself. She was already old for a gibbon and very calm, yet there was something out of the ordinary in her eyes. I can only describe it as something more intelligent. She was the only gibbon we were allowed to touch. We had to because we needed to apply cream and powder to her stump. She hated the powder though, and would only allow it if she got a little massage first. Like all the gibbons in this area, she was alone in her cage. I guess she just missed being groomed by a partner. There were a few more apes in the quarantine area, most whose names I have already forgotten, but there was one name I will never forget. Boro. Boro was huge for a gibbon and really strong. If he managed to get a hold of your shirt, he could pull you to the cage and rip it off your body with one pull. Same thing was true for tufts of hair. While most gibbons get really excited during feeding time, Boro was different. The first time I approached his cage, he didn't even come down to see what kind of food he would be getting. I could already hear him chewing on something in his cage. Black feathers were floating down from his branch. Somehow he'd managed to catch a bird, and Boro was one of the few gibbons who still had fangs. There also seemed to be something really wrong with his lungs. He was the only one you could actually hear breathing, and when he sang, which he did not do often, it had this weird rattling tone to it. Oh, he was also infected with hepatitis. I can't remember which, and since he liked to throw poo around, his hands were sometimes covered in feces, so you better make sure not to let him scratch you. They had tried to find a girlfriend for him a few times, but it never worked out. It seemed like he just hated the other gibbons, and for some reason, he really hated me. They had told me before that Boro was not fond of new volunteers, but with me, for some reason, it was an entirely different level. For example, we used a water hose to clean the cages from feces. The water pressure had to be quite high because after some time in the sun, the poo would be dry and really stick to the bars of the cage, while gibbons don't like to get wet. That's why most of them hide in one of the top corners while we did the cleaning. During those few minutes, I felt like I was in charge. One small mistake didn't mean a new scratch or a urine stain, but to Boro, the hose meant nothing. Whenever I came close to his cage, he would try to rip it from my hands. He didn't even care if he got soaked. He just cared about catching me and taking something away from me. Whenever I worked in quarantine, I could just feel his stare on me. Whatever I did, he was always watching me. Every single time I came close, he tried to grab me. He would hide in the shadows of his little house or behind some branches, then jump at the fence and reach through it. His claws were always exactly at face level, sometimes just a few inches away, grasping desperately. The Thai keepers told me they had never seen behavior like that before. One day, a huge spiderweb had appeared overnight between a tree and a cage next to his, blocking my usual path. I'm not a fan of spiders, and I was behind on schedule, so instead of removing it, I tried going around it. It meant I had to get a little bit closer to Boro's cage than usual. I thought it was still far enough, but it wasn't. I tried to squeeze past the tree with my back to his cage. He caught me by the collar of my shirt. I was lucky that I was already holding on to the tree, otherwise he could have pulled me to the cage. I heard him hissing behind me as I managed to pull away with my shirt tearing and falling face first into the web. I took a little walk afterwards to try and calm myself down. When I returned, he was quietly sitting in the shadow of his house again, breathing this slow, rattling breath. That was the last time I ever saw him. Now, the things I'm about to tell you next, I did not see with my own eyes, but the keepers told us at lunch a few days later. That morning, when the keepers and some volunteers arrived at the quarantine spot, they felt like there was something wrong. Gibbons usually sing, especially in the early hours of the day. You can hear them from miles away if they give it their all. but this morning it was completely silent. The first thing they noticed when they entered the area was a huge red puddle under Fanta's cage. What was left of him was hanging in the feeding area. They found parts of him in his food basket, outside his cage and on the ground. The second thing they noticed was that Boro's cage was now empty. What had happened was that the part where his little house was screwed to the back of the cage had rusted, and combining its weight with his strength, he managed to rip it out and squeeze himself through the hole it left. He must have lured Fanta to the edge of the cage by rattling his food basket. None of the other gibbons were hurt, fortunately. It was partly my fault that he had escaped. The volunteers were supposed to check the integrity of the cages at least once a week. The tool we used for that was a long stick with a metal hook on top. It should have been used to pull at the rusty parts of the grid to see if they would still hold, but that type of work was a pain in the ass. The tool was heavy and the gibbons would always go crazy and try to grab it. You had to go into places in the area that were hard to reach, so almost nobody ever cared to do it properly. The team they had to catch the gibbons was literally one guy with a blow tube. He was a great guy all in all, taught us how to cook rice in bamboo and could climb a tree in seconds, but he was also a severe alcoholic. Every night he would down a bottle of Sang Som and then try to find a way into the women's bungalow. Nobody really had any hopes of catching Boro again, unless he would return to his own cage by himself, which some of the gibbons before him actually did. From the moment they told me he had escaped, working in the sanctuary became quite stressful for me. I always imagined him watching me from the trees outside. They went looking for him in the forest, but there was no trace. We didn't even hear him sing in the distance. Still though, every time a branch snapped somewhere behind the trees, I twitched. During the next week, we heard some tourists had been attacked by a wild gibbon. They went out into the forest and looked for the culprit, but nothing ever came from it. The following night, I was awakened by a familiar sound. At first, I thought it was my roommate snoring. Then I realized it came from the window, which had no glass, only a mosquito net. A slow, rattling breath. It was Boro. It was pitch black, but I was sure it was him. He was holding his breath every couple of seconds, as if he wanted it to be quiet so he could listen for something. I just lay there trying not to make any sounds. I thought about what I was going to do if he decided to come inside. My plan was to use my blanket to shield my body. My roommate would surely help too. After a few more moments, the rattled breathing stopped one more time. It never resumed. He was gone. The next day, I told our boss I was leaving. It was not only because of Boro. Some of the other people I really liked were leaving too. I just felt like my time there was over. There were many more places in the world I still wanted to see. I'm sure they were able to afford new cages with the money I left them, so I don't feel bad about my decision. I don't know if Boro ever returned to the sanctuary. When I think about it now, though, I just feel sorry for him. He wasn't evil. He was just a wild animal that experienced more terror than most of us can ever imagine. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I don't know if you guys could tell the difference, but I got a new mic in the XLR stuff and got all of my room sound treated, so hopefully it sounds a little bit better than normal. Let me know how it sounds to you guys. If you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share if you feel so inclined. If you have any thoughts about the stories in this video or any feedback on what I can do to improve the videos on my channel, please be sure to leave a comment below. I always love to read through them and see what you guys think of the stories and all that, so please be sure to share your thoughts. If you guys have any stories that you would like to share yourself, or any stories you'd like to suggest that I read, please take a look in the description below the video. You can find links to my social media, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. Send me a message on any of those, and I will try to read your message as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline of the story what the name of the story is if it has one, the type of story if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, I do have two other channels, Darkest Hour, where I do dark documentaries once per month, and Mr. Blue Sky, where I do at least one true crime documentary a week. If you guys are interested in that kind of content, why not take a look at those and check them out? Maybe they'll be for you. Anyways though guys, I think that's all for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.